Please be seated. Distinguished colleagues, dear audience, Petra, over there, thank you, Gudrun, Storm and Damian, and of course, Professor Vincent Blok. It's an honor and a pleasure to welcome you today in our auditorium, where in a few moments, Professor Vincent Blok will join our academic community by presenting his inaugural address. He is appointed as Personal Professor of Philosophy of Technology and Responsible Innovation. The Personal Professorship was installed to honor Wageningen researchers for their continuous extraordinary scientific quality and achievement with research, education, and value creation. With the Personal Professorship, we bring continuity in our faculty and enhance its quality. The fact that we for several years have been the global #1 university in agriculture and food science and global #2 in the field of environment and ecology indicates that we are probably on the right track. And with the appointment of Professor Vincent Blok as personal professor, I assure that we continue to stay on that path. It is a tradition during the ceremony to reflect back on the academic career of Professor Blok. Where did it start? Vincent Blok studied philosophy at Leiden University and obtained his PhD degree in 2005. The subject of his doctoral thesis were two of the first generation of philosophers who reflect on the role of technology in our modern world, Martin Heidegger and Ernst Junger. Interestingly, Junger also showed interest in the domain of Wageningen University and research. Besides philosopher, he was also an entomologist. Did you know that? No, I also didn't know. Between 2006 and 2011, Vincent Blok worked as director of the Louis Bolk Institute, where he was involved in research in the domain of organic and sustainable agriculture, nutrition, and healthcare. With his background in business administration and philosophy, Professor Blok started his tenure track at the Business Management and Organization Group here in Wageningen in 2010. He developed a research niche in the area of responsible innovation in the private sector. This is a very relevant topic for many of our research groups who work together in public-private collaborations. Several NWO and EU-funded projects have allowed Professor Blok to become a leading scientist and author in this field. In 2019, Vincent Blok switched to the philosophy group. Today, he leads a team of 11 PhDs and postdocs, all in the field of philosophy of technology and responsible innovation. Together, and probably most of them are here in the room, they have carved out an important position in this field. Their research is characterized by a bilateral approach. In the field of life science, many philosophers reflect on the social and ethical impacts of their specific technologies. So too does Professor Blok's group. But at the same time, they embed their research in fundamental philosophical, it's just an intermezzo to see if you're all awake. Philosophical theory. This allows the group not only to reflect on the meaning of technologies for the human condition and environment, it also makes for a unique contribution to contemporary philosophical debates. The encounter between technological innovations and fundamental philosophy puts familiar theory in a new light. It leads to novel insights and new arguments. Professor Blok is also the scientific director of the 40EU Center for Ethics of Technology, a collaboration between the 4 technical universities in the Netherlands. And if you are interested in the material, you can find it also on EduSources, a very interesting source for what have the group performed. In Wageningen, he leads a large NWO project researching the ethical, social, and legal aspects of artificial intelligence. The project is a prime example of the One Wageningen approach, bringing together the expertise from several science groups, and AI is, of course, one of the most relevant subjects of our age. It's of utmost importance to consider the social ethical impact of this new technology in the Wageningen domain. Professor Vincent Blok does not limit his insights to the academic arena alone, but he is also engaged in societal and public debates. He is really a gifted author with several monographs contributing to the philosophy of management and the environment. Last year, for instance, he managed to take a prominent role in societal outreach on the basis of a book he wrote for a large audience. Probably you're all aware of that, From Wereld naar Aarde, or in English, From World to Earth. Van Wereld naar Waarde offers a novel philosophical perspective on our relationship with the planet in times of climate change. The publication attracted a lot of attention with extensive interviews in most quality newspapers in the Netherlands. Professor Blok advocates an egocentric viewpoint, world viewpoint. Not people should be central, but nature. In his work, he explores the philosophical basis of that worldview. Dear audience, we all know that reflection is important. We try to teach our students to reflect on their process, and we consider it also a vital process for learning. But reflection is difficult, and reflection on yourself is probably the most difficult thing to do. Professor Blok, I admire your honest and very personal reflection on the process that has led to your appointment as professor today. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're interested, you can read it in the latest version of resource. Please take one when you leave this room. Dear audience, I don't think I need to emphasize more that Professor Vincent Blok is a true representative of our Wageningen approach for science, as he combines excellent research with striving for impact. It's now time to yield the floor to Professor Blok for his inaugural address, entitled Philosophy of Technology in the Digital Age. Professor Blok, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Rector, for the kind words. I will start by outlining the storyline of my oration. We have a group of familiar friends, we have scientists, and we have philosophers, so it's maybe good to start to identify what philosophers tend to talk about and what is the phenomenon that philosophers research. And this subject matter, at least in my view, does not only consist in ethical issues that new technologies raise, but also in the disruption of the world in which we live and act by these technologies. I will illustrate this by reflecting on the convergence of the digital world and the physical world in the digital age. Subsequently, I will ask how it is possible that new emerging technologies can have an impact on the world in which we live. And with this, we encounter some of the critical and ethical questions that we research. As a final step, I hope to open a progressive perspective on the emancipatory potential of disruptive technologies that we develop here in Wageningen. The digital revolution does not only involve the emergence of a new generation of radically new artifacts like sensors or robots, but involves the disruption of the world in which we live and act. To explain what I have in mind, I will start with an example. The European Commission invests around 150 million euros in the development of a digital model or replica of planet Earth, called Destination Earth, or in short, Destiny. That is a one-to-one representation of the physical Earth and can predict the effects of climate change and the impact of adaptation and mitigation strategies. Destiny does not only constitute a new virtual world next to the physical world we experience in our daily life. as the digital revolution also disrupts the physical world. The example of Destiny can make clear what I have in mind. If the ambition of Destiny is to represent, I quote, represent a real breakthrough in terms of accuracy, local detail, access to information, and speed and interactivity, then the assumption is that not only the digital twin of planet Earth is data-driven, but also that the physical Earth itself appears as a giant data set, fully accessible via our algorithms and can be integrally represented by the digital twin. The accurate simulation of the Earth system by Destiny presupposes the redesign of the basic structure of our understanding of the world, namely as a data-driven world in which the physical and the digital increasingly fuse. Only because of this fusion of the physical and the digital, Destiny can claim to be an accurate representation of the physical Earth, can claim to be able to predict the impact of climate change based on virtual models, and is able to test solutions digitally to address climate change. I speak about a world of data, meaning that data is not so much a characteristic of physical entities we encounter in the world, like the color of my cap or the material this desk is made from, but where data concerns a metaphysical structure that characterizes the whole of being as transferable and storable information. The world of data supports the functioning of digital devices and adapts the environment of the device to its functioning. For instance, a digital twin is dependent on data for its functioning and at the same time adapts the cow, the plant, or the Earth system as a data set in order to accurately represent them. While in previous times the world consisted of relative, stable, and discrete substances or objects, with the emergence of digital technologies, a new coherence of the world emerges in which plants, cows, and digital twins become homogeneously mobilized objects that are interconnected and interdependent in the Internet of Things. With this, I don't want to imply, of course, that we don't see a cow in the meadow anymore, but that everyday life experience is nowadays mediated by this world of data. And philosophers are particularly interested in these type of metaphysical shifts in which the sense or the meaning of the same thing appears in a complete new way, as they are interested in the ontology of the present, the nature of the digital age in which we live, and ask what are the implications and consequences of this world of data for the human condition and its environment. In order to position my research in contemporary debates, it may be good to remark that many philosophers of technology are reluctant to raise these type of questions. They oppose to the previous generation of philosophers who tended to abstract from concrete technologies and reflected on general characteristics. For instance, Jacques Ellul, his idea of technology as an instrumental rationalization. Am I not committing to the same type of abstraction in my previous slides? Should we not instead engage in an empirical turn in philosophy of technology and focus on individual artifacts like agricultural robots and AI-driven decision support systems? Also because these AI applications mainly raise ethical questions. On the one hand, I agree with this criticism and believe that the empirical turn is important to enrich the philosophical debate. This is why we as a team engage in interdisciplinary research in our project, as I will show later in my presentation. But on the other hand, we run the risk to throw the baby out with the bathwater if we neglect the questions regarding digitalization I just introduced. Concrete digital technologies like smart cameras and sensors can only function in a context, milieu, or world of data as substrate for algorithmic calculation, and it is especially this context that raises also societal concerns. If we, for instance, look at responsible or trustworthy AI in food production, it is insufficient to look only at the integrations of values like fairness or privacy in the design, as society has also more broad concerns like the industrialization, instrumentalization and commodification of the agricultural sector. In our research, therefore, we consider both the physical, that means the innovation process leading to concrete new technologies, and the, what I then call, for the time being, metaphysical, the redesign of the world in which they are embedded. You can imagine that this raises all kinds of methodological questions, and I have wrote extensively about philosophical methods since my dissertation. And together with Mariska Boschart, we work on the development of a methodology to research both of these levels of technological analysis in an integrated manner. I don't want to bother you too much with these methodological questions. That is maybe for later. And I would like to concentrate for now on another question, namely, what is the relation between the emergence of new concrete technologies and the impact they have on the world and the design of the world? So in other words, who or what invented the world of data? To answer this question, it seems to be obvious to point at the human as the inventor of digital technologies. So can we then argue that humanity is a world-making power that constitutes this new world of data? Now, we can easily admit that digital technologies are important in the emergence of this digital world, but philosophers like Marx already questioned whether technological innovation and technological evolution is best understood from the perspective of the human, or maybe more comparable with biological evolution. In fact, technological evolution has to be seen as determined by previous stages of development, interdependencies with other technological developments, etc. It can be argued, therefore, that the digital world we currently live in is created by a succession of interrelated inventions since the Industrial Revolution. In this process, the human is neither the primary author nor the primary subject of the digital world, but is itself included in the emergence of this new world, since the human is also understood as a data set, for instance in the design of a digital twin of the human immune system, or in his training capacity to put into the training of ChatGPT. So because I don't want to say that the human is completely irrelevant, but it's not the primary agent that is steering in this direction. So if the human is not the primary agent here, as the inventor of the world of data, we have to explore another hypothesis, namely the idea that technological innovation itself constitutes the digital world. In order to explore this hypothesis a little bit with you, we first have to understand what innovation is. I suspect that also in your thinking about innovation, you tend to equate technology and innovation and to talk about technological innovation. This is commonplace, and philosophers tend to merge innovation and technology itself as well. Classical philosophers like Heidegger never reflected on the notion of innovation, while contemporary philosophers use the term sporadically and only in connection with technology. There is, however, sufficient reason to dissociate innovation from technology. With technology, we in first instance think about a product, like a tool, machine, or artifact. But innovation is more than that, because innovation concerns both a process, the innovation process leading to these artifacts, and then the artifact itself. We can say that all technology is the product of innovation processes, but it's not the other way around, that all innovation processes lead to technology. We can think of social innovation, business model innovation, or all that kind of examples of non-technological innovations. Let us therefore have a closer look at the phenomenon of innovation itself. Economist Joseph Schumpeter conceives innovation as creative destruction. In history, radically new to the world innovations are created for the first time, ranging from the first steam engine to the first digital camera. But the creation of new innovation extends beyond the artifact itself, because it destroyed, for instance, the industry of analog cameras and the chemical industry around the development and printing of film rolls, and leads to the bankruptcy of large companies like Kodak, and created at the same time a complete new industry of editing, photo editing and storage programs. This is what is depicted in the picture here. New emerging technologies or disruptive technologies lead to an economic wave and then are followed up by new disruptive technologies. The creative destruction involved in innovation shows two other aspects of technological innovation that are missed by traditional philosophers. Jacques Ellul, for instance, argues that technology is an established rule-governing system of laws, rules and routines that we as humans have to follow. But innovation as creative destruction enables us to understand innovation as rule-creating and rule-destructing system. For Martin Heidegger, technology is that with which we are always familiar. So we are all living in a meaningful world, and the pencil, the hammer, is always known. We already know how to use it, how to deal with it. So for him, technology is the known or the familiar. But the concept of innovation that we are talking about here as creative destruction takes the unknown and the unfamiliar of radical new technologies as a point of departure. The idea that innovations lead to economic waves shows already that they operate at two levels. First, you have the innovation as it appears as a new artifact, and you have, like the steam engine for instance, and you have the economic wave that Schumpeter is indicating. Now you can relatively easily, I guess, extend this notion of economic waves or economic industries, for instance, to the social-political level or a social-political world. And for instance, again as an historical example, the invention of the steam engine at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution gave rise to things like railway industry. Railway industry enabled people from the countryside to enter city centers, to start to build factories based on the materials that can be transported to the city centers. And in the wake of the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine and the railway industry is then also designing or redesigning the way we live together. A new working class, a new societal category like a working class emerges. Inequality, unemployment. So this example shows that it is possible that innovations are insufficient understood if we look at them only at the level of the novel artifact, because they also impact the social political world we live in, disrupt human values, etc. Till now, we only talked about the impact of technological innovations on the economic and the social political world. That is also researched by historians and by STS scholars, for instance, but not yet about the ontological impact of on the basic structure of reality that we as philosophers are also interested in. Another example can make clear what I have in mind, and I will start with a classical example and then apply it in the context of digitalization. The use of the telescope extended for the first time the human senses to the universe beyond the world as we know it, which was inaccessible before. It opened up a new reality beyond our everyday world. At the same time, however, it disrupted our relation to the world as it destroyed the geocentric orientation, the idea that the Earth is the center of the universe, and replaced it with a heliocentric orientation. The Earth emerges from now on as a planet among other planets in an intimate and unified universe. Thanks to the technical mediation of the telescope, the universe became accessible with the certainty of sense perception, which was previously only accessible in speculation or imagination. At the same time, thanks to the technical mediation of the telescope, humans became astral as they found a new Archimedean point in the universe outside the world. It constituted a new orientation of human existence, as if humanity manages and controls the planet from outside. What the example of the telescope makes clear, I hope, is that disruptive technologies and innovations destruct the geocentric world and create this heliocentric world. I talk about the creative destruction of the world in this context by the telescope, because the telescope didn't change anything at the level of humans or beings in the world, but at the same time, the meaning or identity of the world changed completely, as we are no longer the center of the universe, but the planet whizzing through space. Something similar is at stake in the digital revolution we experience today. The plant and the cow, the human and the planet appear today as rich data set. While in previous times, the world consisted of relative, stable and discrete substances that were characterized by dichotomies like physical versus virtual, natural versus technological, human versus non-human, in the digital age, these dichotomies erode in the homogeneity of data as a substrate of all material entities we encounter in the world, whether as substrate of biochemical or electric algorithms, or whether as substrate of human intelligence or artificial intelligence. The world increasingly becomes a data-driven network in which everything is interconnected and interdependent. In this transformation of the world, also notions like the spatiality and temporality of human existence and acting in the world change, as we seem to be no longer dependent on the physical proximity, location and embodiment, for instance. The human becomes primarily the data processor in the digital world. In this world, there is no room anymore for the singularity for human existence, as data is never singular but always appears in multiplicity. As a consequence, human existence is only meaningful within the Internet of Things. Based on these type of reflections, I have tried to answer the question, what is innovation? And proposed a framework for a philosophy of innovation that considers both the socially disruptive technologies themselves, that is what the empirical term asked for, but that is also interested in the process and evolution of technologies and how they emerge and evolve. That's the processual term of philosophy of technology that we call for with some colleagues, and considers also this ontological impact on the world, in the identity of the world and the identity of human existence in the digital world. This is then what I call the ontological term. At the same time, we have sufficient reason to be critical about the convergence between the physical and the digital. For instance, together with Paulan Korenhoff and Sanneke Kloppenburg, we have shown that the relation between the physical and the entity and the digital twin assumes to be a neutral and transparent representation, but that the twin does actually not represent the physical entity in a neutral way. The twin is selective, for instance, the selection what data is adopted. It's interpretative, what is the meaning of the data that we have involved in the twin. And therefore it introduces already a surplus or a supplement to the original that becomes the norm for the future development of the physical entity. Notions like the selection, interpretation and translation of data show already that the convergence between the physical and the digital is limited by a principal difference between the two, and that it's important to philosophically reflect on the nature of this difference and the nature of these operations like interpretation and translation that these technologies use. It is especially the continental philosophical tradition that has always dealt with these type of questions and phenomena. Philosophers like Derrida and Lacoue-Labarthe can help us to think the relation between the original and the copy, in this case the twin, and the nature of the principal difference between the two. Philosophers like Dilthey, Benjamin and Nancy can help us to think about the nature of interpretation and translation that is at stake in digital twins. It is clear that these philosophers never turned their thinking to the context of the life sciences or to digital technologies. What we as philosophers here in Wageningen do is to advance philosophical theory by confronting these theories from the philosophical tradition with these new contexts like digital twins and AI in order to advance both disciplinary, philosophical and interdisciplinary debates. The limits of the convergence between the physical and the digital can become concrete if we consider that digital technologies like Destiny function in a digital world and are at the same time dependent on the biosphere of the planet for their functioning. The Earth provides the material, the scarce materials for the hardware. It provides the energy to run the software. It provides the location where the data sets can be located. It provides the waste, the area where waste can be externalized. This Earth is not part of the digital world of digital twin, but the physical condition of the possibility of every digital world. And the question is whether this condition itself can be digitalized. Is the Earth in the end a spaceship or digital vehicle that can be steered and controlled by humans, or an eruptive, uncertain, floating and wandering planet that always potentially disrupts the digital world and withdraws its management and control, as the term planetes suggests? In order to consider the biosphere of the planet Earth as ground of the digital world, we have to reflect on the materiality of planet Earth as the condition of possibility of every digital technology. As such a condition of possibility, we can consider the materiality of the Earth as a potential limit to the hybridization of the physical and the digital. This opens all kinds of avenues for philosophical research that I have explored in the book that was also mentioned by the rector. Together with Julia Rijsenbeek, we reflect on the limits of this hybridization in the context of synthetic biology. And together with Ole Thijs, we criticize Heidegger's concept of technology because the Earth does no longer emerge as reservoir of resources present for exploitation, but also as the singular condition for the existence of life in general. In this research, we explore how philosophical concepts like Earth and world can inform the concept of sustainable technologies. We can also experience the limits of the convergence of the physical and the digital if we consider the difference between human intelligence, HI, and artificial intelligence. Let's consider for a moment the open letter to Paul's giant AI experiments signed by tech giants like Elon Musk, who argue, and I quote, "Contemporary AI systems might eventually outnumber, outsmart, obsolete, and replace us," quote ends. If you say AI is still in its infancy, but one day it will outperform human intelligence, then you presuppose a principal homogeneity between human intelligence and artificial intelligence as data-based algorithmic process. Here the same type of cross-fertilization is at stake as we discussed earlier in the constitution of the digital world. On the one hand, it is the human intelligence that inspires the development of and is the norm of artificial intelligence. It defines what intelligence means. On the other hand, the nature of AI as algorithmic data processing capacity becomes the measure of what intelligence as such means. Only if intelligence as such is described in terms of data processing algorithms, HI can be one day outperformed by AI. But are we data processing machines? In this context, it is important to mention a large NWO-funded gravitation program in which the crème de la crème of philosophers at the Dutch technical universities and Utrecht University research the ethics of socially disruptive technologies. In this program, we focus especially on the conceptual disruption of philosophical and ethical categories due to technologies like AI and digital twins, such as the notion of the nature of intelligence, the nature of human, etc. I am not so much critical about AI because of the potential risks it has for our society, as the open letter suggests, but about the convergence of human intelligence and artificial intelligence that is even stimulated by open letters like these. It ripens the minds for a very narrow understanding of intelligence that can be applied in both the domains of human and artificial intelligence. Whereas human intelligence is something completely different. I limit myself to 2 examples here. We can raise questions about the different temporalities which are at stake in human intelligence and artificial intelligence. As artificial intelligence is trained by past data and extrapolates to the future, while human intelligence is bound to the orientation on the future because of our mortality, a future death that never will become present as data entry, as we can learn from philosophers like Heidegger. Another entry point for criticism concerns the different notions of the rationality in HI and AI, as AI is limited to the instrumental, formal reasoning part of intelligence, while human rationality involves also emotions, volition, and desires, which are even opposed to this rationality, as we can learn from philosophers like Nietzsche. Together with Luc Stellinga, we researched the concept of human-centered AI from the perspective of the philosophical anthropology and asked for the human condition in human-centered AI. And together with Jochem Zwier, we research how AI constitutes a new habitat for human intelligence in the digital world. And this brings me to the, finally, for some maybe, this brings me to the concepts of responsible innovation and ethics of technology. Responsible innovation focuses on the question how social and ethical concerns can be identified and addressed in an early stage of technological development, in the phase that you can do something about them still. I believe that responsible innovation should not be focused only on ethical issues like privacy, discrimination and welfare in digital technologies like facial recognition or milking robots. Societal resistance against these technologies is also informed by more profound concerns about surveillance capitalism, enslaving consumerism, or the industrialization of food production. Responsible innovation should therefore not be limited to the ethics of digital devices, but should also integrate critical reflections on the convergence of the physical and the digital, on the instrumentalization of humans and animals as data set, etc. Together with Lucien von Schomberg, Mark Ryan and Lisanne Pentilla, we consider how philosophers like Arendt, Foucault and Marcuse can be made fruitful to broaden the perspective of responsible innovation and ethics of technology in these directions. Although I believe that fundamental philosophical questions are relevant, it is as important to connect those questions with actual technological developments. To do this in practice, we have initiated the development of an ELSA lab. ELSA stands for the ethical, legal and social aspects of digital technologies like AI, and the idea is that concerns regarding these issues should be considered in an early phase where we still have the opportunity to steer the technology development in the right direction. With an interdisciplinary consortium from Wageningen University and Research, we acquired NWO funding for the development of an ELSA laboratory to research the ethical, legal and social aspects of AI for sustainable food, in which we engage in both the philosophical and the ethical aspects of responsible AI. I lead this project together with Mireille van Hilten, and I'm also very happy that Jonne Hoek is also part of my team and supports me next to his PhD in Twente. Our engagement in interdisciplinary research shows that we are not necessarily pessimistic about the digital age or see technology as the danger of our time. All technological innovations are potentially creative destructive, potentially disrupt the existing world and construct a new world. And this is important because in times of climate change, we are urgently in need of an emancipation of the world. Therefore, we have to conceive technology beyond the classical options of technophobia, the fear of technology, or the technophilia, the embracement of technology as the solution for all our problems. In fact, there are technological innovations that entrench the current exploitation of the biosphere, but we have to look for innovations that emancipate the world and contribute to a sustainable future. Just last week, Roel Veraert defended his dissertation in which we ask how we have to conceive the relation between the biosphere and the economic sphere in the bio-based economy, that it provides a clear direction towards a sustainable future. I believe that our task at the university is to actively experiment with the emancipatory potential of new and emerging technologies in which a sustainable world can be envisioned and constituted. An example of our progressive research of the emancipatory potential of technology can be found in the shift from human-centered technology to bio-centered technology. As human intelligence is already much broader than the narrow rationality of artificial intelligence, the same can be said of biological or ecological intelligence. How does nature solve problems in the course of evolution? How do organisms collaborate in ecosystems? From this we can learn that intelligence is maybe less the product of an individual actor like a human, but emerges through the multiple interactions of organisms in their ecosystem. Can we learn from and mimic natural intelligence in technological design? This is what is called biomimicry or biomimetic design. Together with Alessio Girola, we researched the philosophical and ethical implications of biomimetic technologies. A particular case of biomimetic design is artificial photosynthesis, on which I work with Eugène Popin and engineers from Twente University. If artificial photosynthesis turns out to be possible and scalable, it not only provides an example of regenerative, sustainable design, but potentially also a decentralized energy system as alternative for the centralized energy systems that are dominated by the private sector as we know them today. Of course, technological development since the Industrial Revolution can be seen as part of the problem of climate change. But by reconceptualizing technology as bio-based, mimicking the closed cycle loops of natural intelligence, for instance, technological innovations can potentially construct a new sustainable world in the future. Ik schakel nu over naar het Nederlands om een aantal mensen te bedanken. Allereerst wil ik de rector magnificus en de directeur van het departement Maatschappijwetenschappen, Jacques van der Voorst, hartelijk danken voor de mogelijkheid om persoonlijk hoogleraar te worden aan deze fantastische universiteit. De weg naar het professoraat is lang en kent vele leerscholen. De eerste leerschool is natuurlijk mijn gezin van herkomst. Ik herinner me nog goed de vurige discussies met Dick over communisme en vegetarisme aan de keukentafel in mijn puberteit. Machteld en Ruud zaten dan ons wat meewarig aan te kijken, maar ik denk dat ik in die tijd mijn retorische vaardigheden heb kunnen ontwikkelen. Een andere belangrijke leerschool waren mijn jaren in de Haagse kraakbeweging. Het leven naar idealen en het vormgeven van alternatieve manieren van samenleven en samenwerken had ik voor geen goud willen missen. Ik ben dan ook ontzettend blij dat er een paar mensen zijn uit die tijd. Natuurlijk zijn mijn leermeesters uit Leiden enorm belangrijk geweest. In Leiden zeiden ze altijd, wij doen in de grote namen van de filosofie. En daar heb ik de gedegen kennis opgedaan van de filosofische traditie die ik nog dagdagelijks gebruik met mijn projecten. Ik wil met name mijn promotor Wouter Oudemans en mijn filosofische voorbeeld Gerard Visser danken voor hun rol in mijn ontwikkeling. Binnen Wageningen moet ik allereerst denken aan Onno Omta. Waar zit je? Onno. Van de Management Studies Groep, vandaag de dag de Business Management and Organization, Wilfred. Ik had weliswaar een MBA op zak en ervaring als directeur van een onderzoeksinstituut, maar hij nam natuurlijk een enorm risico door een filosoof in de tenure track aan te nemen zonder empirische ervaring. Ik was in het begin ook wel een beetje een vreemde eend in de bijt. En ik ben dan ook ontzettend blij met collega's zoals Domenico Dentoni, Thomas Lans en Renate Wesselink, want die hebben mij in het begin echt op sleeptouw genomen en meegenomen in hun projecten en hun empirische onderzoek, waar ik ontzettend veel van heb geleerd. En het was ook ontzettend leuk trouwens. Mijn lieve collega Bart Gremme is ontzettend belangrijk geweest om de aansluiting te vinden met de filosofen hier in Wageningen. En heeft me bekendgemaakt met de specifiek ethische vraagstukken die spelen in de levenswetenschap. Toen ik bij de filosofen ging werken, word ik door Marcel voorbij uit mijn comfortzone gehaald. Hij zei dat filosofen in Wageningen geen auteursfilosofie bedrijven en dat ik dus niet langer over Heidegger en Jünger en al die fantastische mannen kan schrijven, maar dat we die theorieën moeten gebruiken in de context van systematische vragen over. Nou, ik hoop, Marcel, dat je tevreden bent met wat ik heb geprobeerd te vertellen vandaag. Ik wil ook de filosofiegroep, het secretariaat en de administratie danken voor het intellectuele en gezellige klimaat waarin ik kan gedijen. Filosofen kunnen zich nog wel eens verliezen in een richtingenstrijd of filosofische debatten persoonlijk maken, maar in Wageningen heerst een respectvol klimaat van geëngageerde en bevlogen onderzoekers. Ik noem met name even hier Bernice Bovenkerk, met wie ik op dit moment met heel veel plezier de filosofiegroep ad interim run. En ik noem mijn collega Zoe Robé, met wie ik 2 supergave PhD-projecten begeleid. Mijn filosofische inspiratie put ik in belangrijke mate uit mijn projecten met mijn PhD's en postdocs. U hebt de mensen die nu met mij werken, hebt u gezien in de presentatie. Maar ik wil bij deze ook de inspiratie van de vroegere PhD's en postdocs noemen als een enorm belangrijke inspiratie. Een andere belangrijke inspiratiebron is de leesgroep in de continentale techniekfilosofie, die ik sinds 10 jaar run met mijn filosofische vrienden Pieter Lemmens en Jochem Zwier. En waarmee we verschillende workshops en special issues hebben georganiseerd om de voor ons belangrijke thema's weer op de kaart te krijgen in de debatten in de filosofie. Een andere leesgroep stelt kunst en literatuur centraal. Mijn andere grote liefde, waarin ik samen met mijn vrienden Martijn Pietersen en David Gosker zit. De kunstenaar die ook het beeld dat u hierboven ziet, heeft gemaakt. Er zijn ook een aantal mensen belangrijk geweest die te vroeg zijn overleden. Ik denk dan in eerste instantie aan mijn opa Kraan en mijn moeder Henriette, die natuurlijk enorm trots op me zouden zijn geweest als ze hierbij aanwezig zouden kunnen zijn geweest. Maar ook aan lieve vrienden zoals Ad Zets, Jerry Mertens en Jan-Paul Westgeest. Ten slotte wil ik mijn gezin, Damian, Storm, Gudrun en mijn lieve vrouw Petra danken. Petra, we hebben samen een heerlijk creatief ecosysteem bij ons thuis gemaakt, waar de hele dag door muziek wordt gemaakt en schitterende gesprekken over politiek, muziek, film en literatuur kunnen worden gevoerd. Dank jullie wel voor de inspirerende omgeving thuis, waarin ik me gelukkig ook soms kan terugtrekken om in relatieve rust op mijn kamer te kunnen schrijven. Ik heb gezegd.